This is Create the Next from ProCFO Partners, where every week we explore strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help today's businesses put their financial picture in context.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Mitliff, and I'm really excited to be a part of a conversation today where we're talking about increasing company value. We've got two genius level experts with us, which is kind of interesting because they kind of represent the ends of the spectrum on this, bottom line and top line impact. And so I want to welcome Martin Cunningham from ProCFO Partners and Mark Kesti from Innovo. And we'll talk a little bit more about those organizations down the road. But guys, let's just dive right into it. Talk to me just a little bit, Martin, about this bridge, because in a lot of organizations, it's very easy to think about sales in a conceptual space that is somehow separate from kind of that bottom line stuff. So are we making more sales, which isn't always the same as are we making more money? Are we making more profit? So talk to me, Martin, just a little bit about that relationship between sales and I guess the larger strategic financial strategy, the larger financial perspective that an organization should have, so that we are starting from a place of let's think of these things together and not separate.
To address your question here, when I look at valuation, I generally look at three particular factors or items, and I'll kind of dive into each one a little bit here and go forward. First thing, obviously, improving profitability. Second would be reducing risk. And third is ensuring investor confidence. So when we look at improving profitability, certainly top line growth helps a lot. But the CFO and the financial professional is going to take that top line growth and improvement and look at number one, the analytics behind the financial statements, the allocation of resources, pricing strategies to ensure maximization of revenue, growth opportunities in terms of building recurring revenues, customer diversity, product and service differentiation, managing cash flow, as well as looking at operational operational efficiencies to look at seamless procedures, employee retention, and automation. When we look at reducing risk, that improves company value through internal controls, compliance with industry and regulatory standards, debt and capital structuring to make sure the company isn't over-levered, hedging strategies to mitigate certain market fluctuations if you're in certain spaces and industries, contingency planning, accurate and timely financial reporting, as well as the due diligence and audit activities around the valuation. Last piece that I'll talk about is ensuring investor confidence. What we want to do is attract and retain long-term investors in this area through communicating the organization's vision, strategy, and value proposition very clearly and openly and transparently. Certainly, raising capital is very important. Negotiating favorable contractual terms. Preparing financial forecasts, models, and analysis to look forward on using your financial statements to demonstrate financial stability, growth potential, and competitive advantage.
Interesting. I always love when, Martin, when you start talking about goals and strategies and things, and there's a lot of stuff that you talked about in there, Mark, that's really interesting, but isn't necessarily top of mind for the VP of sales, or your on the street sales rep. How do we create a big picture? How do we create a big picture so that the sales function is mindful of these other things, even as they have to get, into the sort of tactical stuff of, are we doing the things we need to do to increase that top line? How do we keep that strategic perspective?
Well, obviously, if profits are the key, which they are, it's about the compensation plans. Compensation plans will drive behavior. And the certain clients that we work with will pay commission based on actual sales, but some of them, and we push them towards this, will compensate based on margins. So that really does change the behavior. What kind of deals come in? You see an increase in the overall margin. And the other thing, as a side note to that, when we work with clients, one of the first things we do is look at their existing client base of customers. And if you've been with customers for quite a while, and depending on the size of each of the transactions, there's going to be many clients in your portfolio that aren't paying what other customers are paying as it relates to margin. And two things have to happen. Either one, we need to increase their prices because we have control over that. We don't necessarily have control over the operational side of things, which can help drive cost decrease, or we got to get rid of them, right? And that's a painful exercise, but oftentimes less is more.
I love when we get this kind of rubber meets the road sort of insights. I want to remind everyone to please drop any questions or comments that you've got in the chat, and we'll be keeping an eye on those as we go. Talk to me just a little bit, Mark, as you share that around why is there this disparation in margins? Obviously, one that comes to mind is, well, this client is somebody we brought on 6 years ago, and our pricing structure has changed, and we just haven't kept up. That's one really sort of common place. Others are, we tried to make a deal, and we thought we'd make a lot more in the long run if we sweetened it up front. That never works out. But talk to me just a little bit about that. How do I get myself painted in that corner, and how can I not just adjust it now, as you just said? How do I respond? But what do I need to create sort of culturally so that I stop doing this? I stop creating this problem over and over.
Right. Well, it's from our perspective, it's about the front end. What can we do? What processes can we include in the sales process and early relationship building? So, for example, something as simple as a quote request, what are the parameters internally that we have to meet in order for this to be a viable opportunity, a profitable opportunity? The other thing we do at the very front end is we call it an opportunity scorecard, and not every opportunity is equal. So this scorecard in the early stages of the pipeline helps us to separate the wheat from the chaff. So it's a simple 10-question little Excel spreadsheet that objectively scores opportunities. And if it comes up with a low score, that means a few things. One, what questions do we need to go back to that prospect and ask? And I'm referring to sales itself to get the right answer or the answer, or we have to cut bait and move on. So those are two key things. And as I said before, compensation programs will drive behavior in those issues.
Mark is talking about some things that really connect deep into sort of some operational stuff. One is compensation, but another is this idea of scorecards, which we've talked about before ProCFO Partners. Talk to me just a little bit about that sort of mindset, that KPI-minded mindset, or that analytics mindset, because a lot of organizations don't do it, or they don't do it enough, or they don't do it comprehensively, or they stop doing it after they get something kicked off. There's just a lot of reasons why we should be looking at some sort of a dashboard that is more than big numbers, but is really kind of, here's what's going on in the organization right now. What are some of those, I guess, scorecards that would complement what Mark is talking about? What else in the organization should be happening operationally so that we can start to address some of those things from an analytics perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So KPIs and dashboards are critical to the measurement, not only in the current state of the organization, but it also ties the mission, vision, and core values of the organization to the tactical day-to-day operations of it. So the dashboard tells us exactly where we're at and should, if used properly, establish a set of action items to bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to be.
And I guess as we talk about literally increasing company value, we have to really readily and right now know what our value is, and if you work backwards from big numbers, one of the ways to do that is, so what's going on in the organization, everybody? And Mark, I guess, how dispersed do we get those KPIs? So we've got the scorecard, but talk to me just a little bit about how does that run down to like the individual salesperson? What should that person be thinking about? And how does that funnel sort of widen as we get up into the large organization so that everybody's sort of keeping a scorecard that makes sense with everybody else's?
Sure. Well, to Martin's point, all of the departments, including sales, need to piece together the execution of the long-term strategy, right? Everybody contributes to that. So that's how it filters up to each organization. But at a tactical level, as far as KPIs are concerned on the sales side, I mean, the first and foremost is activity KPIs, because to be kind of at the base level, sales is about one thing and one thing only. It's about the number of quality at bats. The more often we can get in front of the right audience who has the right kind of problems we can solve, or products that address their needs, the more often that can occur, the more often interest can be generated, quotes can be created, and ultimately sales made. So that's the first piece, is just activity in the right places with the right people. And that leads to all the other key metrics. Of course, with the CRM, which needs to be part of a sales organization, it's critical because it also feeds into the operational side. For example, if God forbid we actually produce an accurate forecast, then that's extremely helpful on the operations side and on the finance side, because it gives them a good insight into what not only future revenues, but just as importantly, future costs, future inventory needs. So it's at the sharp point of the spear, if you will. The key is accuracy. The key is consistency. And these, we really look more towards metrics, but those metrics need to be policed pretty regularly by the managers who are leading those salespeople.
I think that's a really interesting sort of segue to an interesting point, which is your data is only good as the data that's being fed into it. And an issue with CRMs, I don't know if the rest of you deal with this, but constantly I'm working with clients who adoption is just a problem. Folks are slow to input into the CRM, or they're inconsistent, or the whole picture is not as clear as it needs to be. And we've got a great question in here that is around thoughts on behavior change coming from communication from the CEO, top leadership, in addition to sales compensation and strategies. And I feel like that's all part of a big conversation. So Martin, if we think about sort of that leadership team or that executive team, what needs to be happening? And again, with this mindset of increasing company value, like if that's always kind of this thing buzzing in the back of our minds and helping us to guide and drive every decision we're making, do you have some advice or some insights on what kind of communications need to be happening regularly, consistently from the leadership team on here's not just our expectations for how sales, for instance, should be sort of, I guess, managing or being conducted, but here's also the expectations we have for how data needs to be happening inside the organization so that we can all make better decisions around that. I feel like this is a constant sort of stubbing our toe sort of issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, it has to be a coordinated effort, and the leadership team really needs to be, on the same page when it comes to messaging to their specific organization. The finance team and the sales team all have to be aligned and work with the operations team for order fulfillment reasons, for profitability, for cash flow. Looking at different metrics depending on what the objective really is for that organization. So I think that to your question here, the communication strategy has to be very specific, very detailed in terms of detailing what it is we're trying to accomplish, where we're currently at, where we'd like to go, and how we get there. If we do those four things, ultimately the results will manifest themselves.
And I feel like there's got to be some component of accountability in there too, right,
Mm-hmm.
Mark? Like there's got to be something in there that's like, I don't know, you don't want to carrot and stick the thing, but there's got to be some like, this is why this is important. And if we can't all be aligned on that, we have to figure out why we're not seemingly in agreement that this stuff is important. How do we culturally make that part of the boss said I have to do it, so therefore I'm going to do it, versus this is better for all of us if I do this? How do I help shift that sort of thinking so it's not always kind of this us against them or because you said so kind of a vibe?
Yeah, I mean, it should always be collaborative, and when you're developing those types of strategies and objectives, it should always have the input of all those interested stakeholders. And as a leadership team, you kind of gather that information, you talk about it as a leadership team, develop a strategy, and communicate that out, and really apply ownership at all levels. I mean, everybody should have their skin in the game in terms of what their piece of the puzzle is and how they drive the result. And ultimately, each person's held accountable for succeeding or not in terms of meeting that requirement.
Mark, what are your thoughts on that same question?
Well, I'll certainly agree with what Martin said. And it's, what does that mean to the individual employee?
Mm-hmm.
What does the strategy mean to that individual? And why is it important for that individual? And how can they specifically contribute to the success of that strategy? That's super important to boil that all the way down to the individual and their contribution. One of the other things that we've done, and again, it goes back a bit to compensation, but create MBOs, we have management by objectives on a quarterly basis with each of the employees. And that talks about strategic execution, if that's something that we want to include in those quarterly objectives. So we've carved out for that employee a specific task or goals that support, when they're added up, the execution of the strategy, but they now have ownership, responsibility for it, and understand the value of their contribution towards it.
I think it's a good example of why it's important to visit strategy more than once a year or more than when you started the business. I think it's an example of why it's important to have a lot of different stakeholders and people, and not just C-suites involved in strategy, but helping everybody to sort of have a voice, or at least feel like they have a place or a position in that. Helps everybody have ownership and buy into it. And you mentioned kind of back on that, to that compensation. And I love the idea of somehow connecting what we all agreed, everybody, was our company strategy to kind of that scorecard of that KPI. But we've got a really good question here, Mark, specifically for you, which is, do you see that companies will stretch or do deals that don't make financial sense, which is a great question, as they try to scale to higher level customers? There's always kind of this, well, we want to get to here. And so in order to do that, let's get our first couple deals in, and that will for sure kind of feed the flywheel. But what's your experience with that, or what's your advice or guidance in response to that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, come on. The sales folks, I mean, they're looking for revenue, right? So they're going to bring something in and they're going to stretch it and morph it. And it's, well, this is a good fit for us, right? No, it's not. So, but I will tell you, salespeople that do that are the good ones, frankly, because they bring in a lot of really well-qualified opportunities too. So that's not a bad thing. But again, it goes back to the discipline of qualification of those opportunities. Now, as it relates to scaling, oh my gosh, I've just seen that over and over where, yeah, they'll take a deal just because it is revenue, even if it's not necessarily good revenue, or, the account's going to grow, or they're going to, we're going to expand in other areas in that company. No. I mean, as hard as it is, somebody in the sales leadership needs to have someone in that organization that says, no, it just doesn't fit. It's a slippery slope. It is a slippery slope. So discipline in that area, as painful as it is critical, particularly for scaling.
Do you agree that brings to mind an issue with what's becoming for me very outdated sort of quota model, where I'm mostly thinking about how many X did I do, how many Y did I do, therefore I hit the target I was given, without thinking strategically, without thinking about revenue, because that wasn't my job. My job was just to make the sale. I did it, and I did it before midnight at the end of the quarter. Like, there's a breakdown in sort of the holistic or the comprehensive view sometimes in the way that we're even treating sales. Do you agree?
Yes and no. Again, that's leadership's responsibility to make sure that the sales organization is focused on the right things. So, for example, we can make sure they're focused on higher profit products or services versus lower margin products or services. We can compensate a higher commission for the higher value, higher margin stuff, products or services. So that really, again, starts at the leadership level. And if at the tactical level, folks are, bringing in deals at the 11th hour, if we've done our job, those deals should fit into the model that we're asking them to build and achieve.
Martin, I feel like Mark is raising some interesting things that connect to some of these other components in the sort of financial function. When you talk about profitability, how should my leadership team or my strategic team be thinking about responding in real time to things like profitability? Should we increase prices? Should this strictly be a function of some sales behavior, or how do we make that? How do we not just revisit this every year or every 3 years or whatever, but how do we keep our pulse on that so that we can, as Mark is sort of indicating, we're making the best decisions so that salespeople can succeed, not just for their quota or their own, but for the company? How do we keep that sort of feedback loop going?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's what the leadership team is really constructed to do, is to collaborate. And to Mark's point, having that information at your fingertips allows for much more robust and thorough decision making, which hopefully leads to a more probable and better result. From a finance perspective, having accurate reporting, good analysis, and looking at which products or services are indeed more profitable. It might look deceiving on the surface that one product might be more profitable than another, but it actually, on the underlying information, suggests otherwise. So the role of finance is really to support sales and operations to ensure that the costs are accurately measured, and ultimately the profitability is accurately conveyed to the team to move forward tactically to follow through on some of these strategic objectives from a sales and operations perspective.
I feel like I could talk for 2 hours, but we've got a couple of good questions coming in, and I want to make sure I hit them. Before I do that, folks, just real quickly, Mark Kesti is the president at Innovo, which is at innovo-sales.com. Fantastic organization, really, for installing fractional sales expertise into your operation. ProCFOpartners.com is where Martin can be found, and the larger team at ProCFO Partners, fractional CFO expertise and services. So definitely be in touch with us at those locations, or just drop some question or thought, or, hey, I want to talk, or whatever, into any comments, and we'll make sure that happens. We've got a really good question that connects right to what you were kind of saying just now, Martin, around how do we make sure that as we're talking about kind of those analytics and that profitability, how do we make sure that our forecasting, and the question was specific on sales, but I feel like it's pretty broad, but how do we make sure that forecasting and our projections is realistic and not constantly a stretch goal for starters, but also a healthy stretch goal, but is realistic? Mark, let me start with you on that.
Yeah, well, obviously garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
And if we left it entirely up to the salespeople, everything would close by Thursday, right?
Right.
Not to demean their value in any way, because, well, nonetheless. So again, it's about the process, and that's the leadership team's responsibility to put that into place so that, yes, in fact, forecasts are accurate. Now, for the record, and I don't think anyone would disagree with me, a forecast is as good as the moment the ink dried, right? Because things change.
Absolutely.
Every moment things change. However, the degree of accuracy should be within a 95 to 90% range, that is accurately predictive. So again, it starts at the beginning, making sure that you have true qualified opportunities in the pipeline. And that's discipline that the sales manager needs to have with the sales team, to be working with them on a weekly basis to go through that pipeline and make sure, the classic BANT, right? Budget, authority, need, time are all part of the questions to ask and to find out, so that we in fact know that, yeah, that's a real deal. We know they have budget, they have money to spend. There is a specific need. There's a timeline involved that they need to make a decision. And we're dealing with the appropriate people that will approve or disapprove that decision.
That's really good stuff. Martin, we've got another question that, again, I love how everything kind of connects, but from your point of view, Martin, is all revenue created the same when it comes to company value?
No. Certainly with respect to revenue, you look at quality of earnings in terms of valuation, higher quality revenue would include more recurring, more customer loyal, more higher margin product mix. Some of those types of qualities would ensure that the revenue growth and trajectory is sustainable. One-offs and winning the big sale. Generally, it's nice today, but it's almost like a sugar high. At some point, if it doesn't continue, you're going to feel the low end too.
Mark, there was a lot there that was getting your interest, and let me tack on to it. Those times when you get, especially in service sort of minded organizations, but you can win a client that is so high maintenance, that is such a time suck, that is such an energy suck, that you're not necessarily maybe keeping an eye on how that's impacting your profitability, that you're losing money without realizing it because you can't do the things that you need to be doing for other clients because you're constantly serving this one sort of problematic. First of all, do you agree that that's the kind of issue that I think it is? Do you see that often? And how do we, keeping what Martin just kind of kept in mind, how do we think about that from that sort of value of revenue point of view?
Yeah, I had one boss who's president of the company that I was a VP of sales with, and he said, we love all of our customers. We just love some more than others. And that's entirely true. So yeah, it's not uncommon to have that thorn in your side client. And the sales side would, because they're kind of moving on to other things unless they're engaged with the customer experience after the sale. But operations is going to tell me, and then the sales team that, look, this is a problem. This is a problem. So it's about communication and getting together on ideally a weekly basis with the leadership team and making sure that the head of sales is aware that this is costing us money or sucking up resources. And, sales needs to go and talk to that client and either fix the problem or, as painful as it may be, fire them.
Right. Which kind of brings us full circle, right? To making sure that you're keeping an eye on these things, that you're keeping a comprehensive eye on these things, that you're not just, I love the sugar high analogy. That's fantastic, Martin, which is, it feels so good to have made that big deal that when you really look at it, it's not that great of a deal. I feel like we've got one or two more questions in there and I won't have a chance to get to them because that's just how good it is. So, you know what? I think we're going to forward those on directly to Martin and Mark, and you guys can follow up directly. I think that's the right move. We need to do this again. Sorry, everybody, but we need to come back and continue this conversation because it's as soon as you scratch the surface, you realize that iceberg is a lot deeper underneath. And I think it's really important and valuable stuff. But thanks, guys, for all of your insight and your expertise and your guidance today. The channels are always open, everybody. So again, drop a comment or whatever. And here's some contact info. And it's really easy to have a conversation and just kind of pick the brains of some experts to say, how do you think I might treat this? And if there's something that we can do to help you, well, thanks everyone. And we'll hope to invite you again to another conversation and hope that you'll join us. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Visit ProCFOPartners.com for more strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help you put your business's financial picture in context.